The list of my favorite books updates all the time. Greetings, my name is Nina, welcome back to my channel, and I have a few videos on my channel about my favorite books. I even have one or two on my old channel. I have been thinking for a while, are some of these books still favorites of mine? Maybe I simply thought they were my favorites. Maybe I enjoyed them in the moment. Sure, they're still solid books, they're still very good, I'm not saying anything, but favorite? The more I think about that, the more I realize that some books have lost this status. Like I said, these books are still solid. I'm not gonna say anything bad about them. However, I no longer consider them to be my favorite. So my last two videos about favorite books, they have aged a little bit badly. Well, luckily I found books that are my new favorites and I want to talk about them in one of my next videos. In this video I'm going to address 12. So I do remember that when I filmed one of my early videos in August 2021 on my old channel, one of the books that I mentioned in that video is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. This is still a solid thriller and a memorable one too, but I need to confess that the main reason I enjoyed this thriller is Amy's monologue. I also like the scene in the film with Amy's monologue, but I prefer the one in the book, even though it's acted very well in the film and it's shot very well too. But it has lost the status of a favorite a few years ago. It's one of the first books that lost the status. I'm gonna go through these two books a bit later. So the next book that lost the status is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this is the first book that I read because I found it in the library. So in the library there were a lot of old books and this book looked quite fresh, so it got my attention. I read it and loved it, even though while reading I was a little bit depressed. There's a lot of family drama in this book, and at the time, back in 2014, so back then, I was obsessed with A Song of Ice and Fire, and A Song of Ice and Fire is full of family drama, and so was this book. And because they addressed the same topics, this and A Song of Ice and Fire, I ended up loving 100 Years of Solitude. And then I got my own copy of the book, but then my love for both of these books calmed down a little bit and I picked up A Song of Ice and Fire and I realized that I still love these books. They're still solid, I still love them very much, and this one, no, thank you very much. I still liked it. I still like it, I still can pick it up and go through it, but it's no longer a favorite. So the next book that lost the status of a favorite book is Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett. I really wanted to reread the book, but I didn't. I think I added this book in my previous video last minute. Don't get me wrong, this is still a very funny story, and I do remember quite a lot from this book. I should reread this. Maybe this book is going to return to my favorites list, stronger and better than ever. But for now, I'm gonna put it away. The next book that lost the status is The Shining by Stephen King. So I read The Shining for the first time in 2015, 10 years ago. But anyway, so I'm holding this English version. I read the book in Russian. Since I'm holding this English version in my hand, I do want to reread the book in this language, and maybe this book is going to come back to the favorites list. And the next book is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. So I have a video on my channel, Why It's Worth Reading, dedicated to this book. I still think that this is one of my best videos. So when I was reading the last three books back in 2022, I thought Chronicles of Narnia were one of my favorite books. Now I realize that I was wrong. But this is one of those books that needs a reread. When I think about it, the thing I like the most about the Narnia series in general is the first film, the one that came out in 2005. So the next book that lost the favorite status is Misery by Stephen King. So This is the first Stephen King book that actually frightened me. I've never been frightened by any of his books. This one, on the other hand, did, and I did not expect this. This book isn't exactly my favorite, but it's definitely one of Stephen King's strongest works. The next book is Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. I want to reread this book. So this book explores the positive side of humanity, and this theme alone is why this book is worth reading, even though there are some aspects of the book that I did not like. To this day, for me, the most memorable part of the book is the beginning. If you read the book, you know why. Okay, the next book is actually a Tolkien book. This is on fairy stories. So I'm going to return to this essay. I'm going to go through it, to analyze it. And I do need to confess that it was very difficult for me to analyze this essay in English. Well, in general, reading Tolkien in English is pretty difficult when you are a foreign English speaker. Ironically, I found out that I actually had this essay in Russian, and I found out about it only after I bought this book. But I do not regret buying this, because I collect Tolkien's books, and this edition is very nice. It was totally worth it. So the next book that lost the status of a favorite, I do not have the book anymore, but I wanna buy it again in English. It's Just Kids by Patti Smith. I really enjoyed this atmosphere of the 60s America, the counterculture, and you name it. I had a copy of Just Kids in Georgian, and I decided to read the English version, and I only had 1 week to read it, so I read it fast, very very fast, and I thought I liked the book, but then I realized that I do not remember it. This is why it lost the status, but I am willing to read the book again. I want to get the English copy. I read Bunny by Mona Awad at the same time as Just Kids, well, around the same time. And I also had a limited time to read Bunny, and I granted Bunny the status of a favorite. However, Bunny kept the status. The next book I do have in 2 languages. However, I wanted to show you the English version, and then I realized that I just couldn't get it right now, and it's Fairy Dream by George R.R. Martin. Okay, this is a very solid vampire novel. However, I do realize now that I read this book at the peak of A Song of Ice and Fire craze. Okay, craze may not be the right word here, but what I mean is that I read the book at the time when A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones was very popular. Even back then, I thought that it was a fairy tale compared to A Song of Ice and Fire, which itself is a fairy tale compared to The Children of Húrin by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay, if you wanna read a solid vampire novel, I recommend reading that one. I think George R. R. Martin went a step ahead with this book, and I really hope that it gets adapted into a film or TV show. And do not get butchered, because adaptations of books tend to be butchered these days. And finally, I have these 2 books, both dystopian novels, so 1984 by George Orwell and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So this book I'm definitely going to read again in Russian or in English. This book actually has the potential to rejoin the list. But this one, on the other hand, I don't think so. Not in English, at least. I bought the English version. Well, first of all, I liked this copy, and I thought I could get familiar with George Orwell's original language, but while reading I realized that the text was way too dry and dull for me, and I think that the Russian translation made it better. Well, at least it made it readable for me. And finally, last but not least, this book was supposed to appear in my next video. I thought it was a favorite, and I got my own copy. However, right before filming this video, I realized that while this short story is very good, it's not a favorite. Not as much as I thought it was, at least. Poor Lisa by Nikolai Karamzin. Nikolai Karamzin. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I refuse to read A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles in English, because I just can't. I just absolutely cannot pronounce all these Russian names in English. I just cannot fathom pronouncing them. I want to read it in a Russian translation. But anyway, this is a collection of short stories by Karamzin, and the titular Poor Lisa was supposed to be in my next favorites video. And that's all. These are the books that lost the favorite status. You know what? I felt so relieved. I was honest with myself and I understood that the favorites list needs to be updated, and it isn't just about adding new books, but also realizing that you do not love the old books the same like you used to. You should let go of them. No, do not get me wrong, I'm keeping all of these books. It's just that they are not in the favorites anymore. I let go of them in that sense. By the way, after I realized that these books weren't my favorite anymore, I also decided to clean my Spotify favorites playlist. Some songs I moved to another playlist. They're not my favorites anymore. I still like them, but they're not all-time favorites anymore. And yeah. What are the books that you let go of, in a sense that they're not your favorite anymore, but you still kept them? Let me know down in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.